Welcome back to the Happy Lawyer Project, lawyers. I am really excited to have you guys here, and I'm really excited to introduce today's guest, Steve Schwartz. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Steve, for those who don't know who you are, I would love if you could just start with a brief description of who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I'm Steve Schwartz. I'm based in New York. I live in Brooklyn, and I've been coaching the LSAT for over 10 years now. I got into it back when I was considering law school myself. I kind of got sidetracked and then obsessed with the LSAT. And so I never ended up going. So I run the LSAT blog, and I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. So I'm kind of obsessed with all things LSAT and law school admissions.
I love that. As we talked about before the show, I absolutely love test prep. So I'm so going to nerd out on this stuff. Let's start with kind of how you developed that obsession. What was your experience with the LSAT?
Yeah, so I went to an Ivy League undergrad. I thought I was going to go to a top 14 law school, but then I was in for a big surprise when I took my first practice test and got a 152. And then it was even more discouraging when I kept getting scores in the low 150s for a few months, even though I put in hour after hour into my studying. I got every LSAT book I could find. I did every LSAT prep test I could that was released, and my scores just wouldn't go up. And it took much more than I expected. It actually took me an entire year before I was able to crack the LSAT code and score a 175. And so once I did, it was like, hallelujah, I want to spread the word. And I had all these friends from college and high school who were also looking to go to law school because that's kind of like the popular thing to do. And so they were asking me for help. I started tutoring them on the LSAT, and it kind of just grew and grew and grew from there. Once I graduated college, I kept coaching the LSAT and decided, you know what? I love it. I'm not really sure I want to be a lawyer, but I do love the LSAT. Why don't I just keep doing this? And so from there, I started the LSAT Blog website, then more recently the YouTube and the podcast, and it's kind of just built on itself.
That's amazing. So I love that story because it is such a story of transformation and of perseverance. There's so many people who would have gotten that score back and said, then law school is not for me, or they would have just compromised and gone to a lower level school and thought those are the schools that are for me. But how would you describe what you were doing wrong? And do you think it's just that people need to spend more time on the LSAT?
That's a great question. I think that people do need to spend more time, but it's also about how you spend your time, what specifically you do. I think most people only want to put in 2 to 3 months, and that was my expectation as well, because that's really all I needed to seriously devote to the SAT, as well as high school academics like finals or AP exams. I didn't think to put in 6 months or a year to any of my previous studies or any standardized tests beforehand. But the LSAT is kind of a different beast, and it requires a different approach. First off, it does require more time. I think most people do need 5 to 6 months to reach their fullest potential. But aside from that, what I was doing wrong is I was taking exam after exam after exam and measuring my results. I had those spreadsheets, I had those documents kind of laying out all my mistakes, but it was more just to kind of see where I was at. And then my score, I was conflating it with my self-worth, with my ego. And so like my IQ, I thought it was all kind of tied up there. And so that was discouraging, but it was also motivating because I was like, a 152 is right around the median LSAT score. And I thought, like most people think they're smarter than average, right? I was like, you know what? I deserve a higher score than this. Why can't I get there? I was like driven and obsessed to get that higher score, to prove it to myself, prove it to others, and then ultimately get into a top 14 law school. And so that was kind of what kept me motivated. But what really changed in me and changed my understanding of the LSAT was when I stopped just simply taking tests and quickly checking the answer key and moving on. But when I more deeply focused on what were my problem areas, what were my mistakes, what were the patterns in how the LSAT test makers were tricking me, to learn to spot those patterns so I could avoid making them in the future.
The thing this sparks in my mind is, that, and I think it's a basketball metaphor about the person who shoots 100 free throws versus the person who shoots 10, but after each one, he records it and then he goes and watches himself and sees what he does before he shoots it again. And the person, you can shoot 10 free throws and learn a lot more than shooting 100 just to see if they go in. And I think that it sounds a little bit like that's what you were trying to do, is just keep taking tests, and that you would somehow just pick it up if you did enough of them without doing the deep work of understanding what you were doing wrong and what you were doing right, which is, I think, for a lot of smart people, not something that we had to do. you just kind of, when things come easily, you don't really realize what you know. So for you, you hit it out of the park, you get this 175, you decide you want to spread the word. But what was that like for you to decide not to go to law school? Was that a hard decision?
It actually wasn't. It's kind of funny. When I was in college, I changed my major a few times. I changed my ultimate career goals a few different times. I thought of being a teacher. I thought of being a professor. And then due to like how the current situation in academia, I decided, you know what, maybe that's not for me because tenure track positions are harder to come by as a professor. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll be a lawyer because I love politics. I love the law. I love current events. And so, but I didn't really have a specific sense of what I wanted to do. I had this vague sense, maybe I want to do something with criminal law, but honestly, that was really more related to what I see on TV and in the movies, as so many pre-law students are kind of caught up in that same idea. And I think I was caught up in the glamour of the courtroom and the real world cases. But honestly, I think you could speak better to this than I can, but there is more paperwork behind the scenes than what actually happens in the dramas. And so once I realized that, and I knew that I had something concrete that I already loved doing and was kind of in the thick of, it was more like, why would I stop doing what I'm doing now when I love it? Why would I love what I'm doing now, and I don't exactly know what my life will be post law school, and law school is obviously a big investment too.
I love that. And I want to highlight what you just said, because I think so many people give up something they love for law school just because they had this idea in their mind that they were going to go to law school. And that whatever they were doing that they love, whether it is teaching the LSAT or dancing or, I don't know, working at the front desk at a tanning salon, like maybe they could own tanning salons now, but they thought it was a summer job and they thought it was just something they were biding their time doing. And so it's just so interesting that you had the foresight to say, I love this, why don't I keep doing it? As opposed to stick with the plan. I'm going to law school. I have to give up this thing I love in order to do this thing that I said I was going to do. And I hope more people obviously I want people to go to law school because I want good people to go be lawyers and to spread the good word, but I also want people to be happy first and foremost. So tell me a little bit more about LSAT Blog. Why did you decide to start it in the form of a blog? I mean, it might've just been, I think it was probably around the time when blogs were like, I think I had a blog back then too, but you've done much better with yours than I ever did.
Well, thanks. It's nice of you to say. I mean, I started it back in 2008. So that was when the internet was, of course, very different. Yep. Blogging was kind of just becoming big. And the LSAT is such a niche subject. And 2008 was so early in the internet that there actually was very little online about the LSAT. Some of the big prep companies had websites, but it was more just to share information on their courses. They weren't really giving away information. And now we see, of course, the internet's all about free, right? So I thought, you know what, I was a recent college grad. I had nothing to lose by just sharing my LSAT knowledge. So I figured, let me put it all out there, and I trust it'll come back to me in some way in the future. And so the blog was honestly the easiest kind of website to set up, which also kind of dictated what I was going to do, because I was like, I want to make an LSAT website. I want to share knowledge. Blogs are easy to set up. It's kind of all customized for you already. All you have to do is type and hit publish. And so I thought, well, every week I'll keep publishing a new LSAT article or two. And then it quickly became 3 a week and then 5 a week. And I just figured if I can write it down, I can publish it. And that's kind of how it grew. And then obviously doing 1 new post a week or 5 new posts a week quickly becomes 50 or a couple hundred a year. And over the course of 10 plus years, that really does scale. And that's kind of just where it came from. It was like, I'm learning about the LSAT. I'm teaching the LSAT. If a student asks a question or emails me, I could type a response, but also publish that response.
Oh, that's so good. And let their questions help you create content.
Exactly.
So now, I think today you have more packages and courses, which I think is very typical. Was that a new model, or were you doing one-on-one teaching earlier? Like, how did you grow your business in this respect?
Yeah, sure. So it started just with a one-on-one, because obviously that's natural. You just, yep. you're there, you're live. And that's how it started. And then a couple of years in, I thought, you know what, I could make some more premium content that I put a bit more detail into, and I could sell that as a low-cost alternative to the 1,000+ courses that they offer, or like $50 books. And so I started writing LSAT prep materials like study schedules, guides, cheat sheets, explanations. And so I figured, you know what, let me do one, see how it goes. And there was apparently enormous latent demand for this. Once I put it out, it sold like hotcakes. People really wanted it. And so I figured, that's great. This will give me incentive and give me the time, the freedom to create more. So I started writing LSAT explanations and all those other resources. The course packages came a bit later once I started learning more about video, and like the Khan Academy and video recording is like a whole nother medium. And so once I did that, that became an alternative to the more expensive big company courses as well. And so it's kind of just grown and grown over time. What you see now is, of course, the culmination of 10 plus years of work. It started with the one-on-one, then the books, then the video courses. Now I'm doing more with live online videos, whether they're like Facebook Lives or live streaming elsewhere. I'm doing a lot with Zoom video conferencing and the group courses too. So it's a lot of fun. I kind of just keep experimenting with it.
I think that's such a lesson for so many people, because especially in this day and age where it feels like when you dive in, everybody's making courses. Everybody has like a membership group. Everybody's doing live retreats. And if you're trying to start something, it feels overwhelming to think of all the content you would need to create to get to that point, to think of all the systems and processes you'd have to have into place. And it's so nice to remember that it always just starts with one person talking to another person, trying to give them information and see if they'll pay for it, And it takes years and years and years of creating content and of honing your skill and of creating your products to get to the point where you're at. I think you're very much one of those, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success type of things. And so many people, and it almost is harder now because we're seeing so many of those 10-year overnight successes bloom. And you have so many lawyers who have all this great content in their minds, whether it's legal content and they want to create content around their legal expertise, or it's a passion project that they want to put out in the world. They're just really struggling to figure out how to get from where they are to where they want to be. What advice would you give somebody who wants to start creating content in 2019?
That's a great question. I think ultimately you just have to start doing it. You have to start talking and recording it, or writing things down and publishing them. And later you can figure out how to organize it all and put it all together. But don't be afraid to fail at it. You see these overnight successes that took 10 years.
Yep.
And I think you see them disproportionately because they have larger online reach. There are many more people, if you just kind of dig deeper a little bit into entrepreneur groups or mastermind groups and things like that, where there are people who are kind of in stage 1 or stage 2, not like stage 10 or stage 100, right?
Yep.
So everyone's kind of evolving along the way, and not everything will work. I think you only see what worked. You don't see the things that failed along the way. I've tried several different things that I thought would be huge and ended up being a total bust. And then there are things that I had no clue how well they would do, and it ended up being huge. And I think ultimately just start publishing, just start putting content out there, and build your audience one person at a time.
So the thing that comes up for me is, how do you know, the thing that people struggle with is investing all this time and energy into something that goes bust. So you say you've done things that go bust. Are you one of those people who's like, minimum viable product, just get the simple thing out there? Or are you one of those people who thinks, I have this idea, I'll put it together and I'll invest the time and money, and if it doesn't work, that's fine. I'm willing to take the hit, but I want to put something good out there?
That's a great question. And I kind of want to have it both ways a little bit. I think that
of course
you do have to have a minimum viable product. You don't want to do what's the opposite. It's like what it's called, like a waterfall, right? Where you kind of do everything first and then you see if anyone likes it. But I've seen people invest 1 year or 3 years in kind of building the entire thing. And while they built that entire thing, someone else put out an MVP that totally disrupted them.
Yep.
And I felt really bad for that person who invested 3 years and they were kind of behind the times anyway by the time they published. So I think you don't want to wait too long to put it out there and see what people think. At the same time, though, you do want to put out something high quality. So there's this kind of
balance.
You have to have a balance between having it be good enough that people will find it valuable, but at the same time, you don't want to wait too long before people are able to see what it looks like.
It's great to get all this background because it's quite clear that you feel passionately, not just about the LSAT, but about the content that you create and about being able to put things out there quickly and efficiently in order to reach more people and have a bigger impact with the work that you do, which I think for me, who wants people to go to law school and wants to increase the pipeline, it's so important for people to have access to these resources. So what are the big projects, big plans? Are you planning LSAT Con for 2020? What do you have down the road for you and the company?
Yeah, sure. So the biggest thing I'm working on right now is actually a new live online LSAT class that I'm teaching in a group setting online. So I'm experimenting with it. I did the first class session this past Monday, and it was a huge success. I offered that one for free just to give people a taste of what it'll be like. And then I'm opening up the doors, I'm closing them this Friday. And so it's just kind of a way it's an experimentation. I have no idea how it's going to do. I'm limiting it to 10 students and we'll see how many sign up. But if I got 5 people, I'd run it. If I got 10 people, I'd run it. And I'm recording it so later I can do something with that material down the line. So I think that's another lesson in terms of like experimentation and repurposing material, I think. So it's a lot of fun, you know?
Yeah, no, the point about repurposing information is so good. So I'm launching a book, strangely enough, this month. And
Nice.
I'm creating video. And my VA was like, don't forget to get video of yourself behind the scenes creating video for your Instagram story. And I'm like, oh, there's so much. It's so meta. But like, I appreciate her reminding me and just thinking about how to make it easy to create content instead of every piece of content has to be, you know, specifically for one purpose. And you can really repurpose things and think about just documenting as opposed to creating. And so there's a lot of that type of thought in the modern content creation world. It's really cool. So have you sat for the LSAT recently?
Yeah. Recently, no. The LSAT has this funny thing where they don't want you taking it if you're an LSAT instructor because it would disrupt the curve, the raw score conversions. Yeah. So they make you sign this thing saying you're only taking it for purposes of going to law school. And some people violate that, but LSAT's kind of touchy on it. So I stay away from that. Interesting.
So, but I suppose you have to have a relationship with them in order to get test questions. How does that all work?
Yeah, so you can set up an LSAT licensing agreement to use the actual LSAT questions, and so that's a bit difficult to get. They are a bit of a bureaucracy with it. They have certain restrictions on it to prevent piracy and such. But yeah, it's good. I'm definitely in touch with them, emailing them, calling them all the time, especially as the LSAT changes this year going digital.
Oh, interesting. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so the LSAT is the last grad level exam that is going to the digital format starting this summer in July. They're giving half of test takers the paper format, half the digital as kind of an experiment. But then this fall, they're going 100% digital.
The LSAT is still on paper?
Yeah, it is. But they're actually going to be on a tablet, strangely, not a computer.
So they just leapfrogged over.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's because we're so advanced in the legal profession.
Legal field, yeah.
Fantastic. So for all of those listening out there, I'd love if you could have one piece of advice based on your decade of experience helping kids master a skill, putting content out there, for those out there who are kind of struggling with mastering the skill, right? Whether it's passing the bar, whether they're struggling in their profession, they're just having a really hard time getting over this hurdle, and they're getting a lot of negative feedback that they're not good enough. They're tying it to their self-worth, kind of like you were, and they're just not able to overcome. What advice would you give them to try to push through this period of their life?
I would say that you are not your LSAT score, and you're certainly not your starting LSAT diagnostic score. The LSAT's like a foreign language, so it's natural that you may struggle with it in the beginning, but it is learnable. I'm proof of that. I have many success stories on my site where actually people are documenting their journeys. They are writing in their LSAT diaries, like a journal, showing their progression. Yeah. You see them starting in the 140s, going to the 160s or the 150s to the 170s and everything in between. So anywhere that you are at the moment, just know that you can improve 10 points, 20 points. Maybe it'll take more than 2 to 3 months, but you can get there in the end and it's worth it.
Yeah. I think that there's so much you can extrapolate from that, because I think whether it's your LSAT score, whether it's how much money you get paid, whether it's your bar results, whether it's your billable hours, do you know what I mean? These are all just metrics that give you feedback, but they aren't who you are. And with the time and the focus and the intentionality, you can improve those feedback mechanisms, the feedback that you get from those mechanisms. So that's great advice. Thank you so much. So I want to transition into what is the second segment of the show, which I call the Happiness Hot Seat. And this is just a round of quick fire questions that I want to ask every person. And for the first 2 years, never got to them. So now I just put them all into every show. So great. You ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
Fantastic. Number 1, how do you deal with the fear of failure or disappointment?
I just acknowledge that it's going to happen sometimes. It's part of taking risks, part of experimentation, and pick up the pieces and move on from there. Just know that not everything will work, but the things that do work will make up for the ones that don't.
Wonderful. Number 2, what habits or strategies do you have that help you prioritize your own happiness?
I think blocking out time for things that are not work. So sleep, diet, exercise, mindfulness, meditation, relaxation. I think if you don't have all 4 of those things in check, then everything else will fall apart. And so I think that just making time for those things every day or at least every week is really important.
I love to hear that. Can you describe a mindset shift that you made that had a really big impact on your life?
Yeah, I would say that done is better than perfect. So not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. A lot of times I would obsess over like editing a video or editing a podcast to be absolutely 100% perfect, but all that time spent editing, I could be creating more material. So I think at a certain point, just deciding that this is good enough and moving on.
That's such a good one. Number 4, can you name a book that has inspired you on your journey?
Yeah, Anti-Fragile by Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Ooh, I've not heard of that one. Tell us more.
Yeah, sure. So that book is all about kind of the idea that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So if you have a failure, if you have a rejection, if you have something totally flop, structuring it so that you can still benefit from that in the end and learn from that set so that you come out even better than when you started.
Anti-Fragile. I'm going to put that on my list. Great. And number 5, and obviously I don't know how many lawyers you hang out with, but I'd love your thoughts on what do you think separates happy lawyers from lawyers who struggle to find happiness in life with a law degree?
My intuition on this is that the lawyers who are less happy may be those who overwork. I think it's too easy to get obsessed with work and spend 12 hours in the office or more, or 16 hours in the office, especially if someone's in corporate law. And so I think achieving a work-life balance may lead to more happiness overall. Obviously, there are some trade-offs there to consider, but I think you just have to decide what's ultimately most important to you.
Great. Okay, fantastic. And so before we wrap up, I always give people an opportunity to send me in questions. And I got a question from a kid named Mike. And this is going to seem like a softball question after our conversation, but he is really struggling with the LSAT. And he's wondering if maybe he should take that as a sign that he's not supposed to be a lawyer.
That's a great question. Yeah, it's a tough position to be in. I mean, I'd want to know more before giving a real answer on this. If, let's say, Mike has been studying for a year and invested countless hours and thousands of dollars in LSAT prep and his score just isn't budging and he's stuck in the 130s or 140s, I would caution him and say maybe law school isn't for him, just because if you can't get the score, you may end up taking on massive law school debt and maybe having trouble in law school or passing the bar. But if on the flip side, he's only been studying for 2 to 3 months and maybe he hasn't invested enough in LSAT resources, maybe it is worth changing his approach, acknowledging it may take longer than he initially thought, and maybe he has to get some more books or get a course or something like that. So I would encourage him, and I think most students are typically in that latter category where the LSAT's more than they expected and they're just kind of stuck in a score plateau. I'd say, look at what you're doing differently. Maybe you were like me and just taking more and more exams and measuring yourself. So if you can change your approach and analyze your problem areas more deeply, and maybe get some actual LSAT prep tests, maybe get a few of those books of 10, you could definitely change where you're at and improve over the next few months.
Fantastic. And last question is, what's the best way for people to follow you, learn more about what you're up to, and, learn about your packages and programs?
Yeah, sure. So folks can find me. Again, I'm Steve Schwartz. I'm at the LSAT blog. Just Google me. You'll find it there. You can also check out the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast, available everywhere: iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and so on.
Fantastic. And we will include links to all of that at the website at thehappylawyerproject.com. So if you are out on a drive, if you are at the gym, if you're on your commute, no worries. Please don't pull the car over. Get to work safely. We'll have that all for you guys. Thank you so much, Steve, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.